Hi, Karen. Welcome to Cage Free Voices Radio, an innovative educational entertainment radio show where youth and adults have the opportunity to see themselves even if the world is blind. I am your host, Bathsheba Smithen, and today we are talking about tackling race relations and demolishing barriers with Karen Fleshman, Esquire. Um, Listen, guys, as you are listening right now, please tag other people into this conversation because it is going to be very eye-opening and enlightening. And I just want to say, like, when we have conversations like this, I'm excited about the ability for us to just get to know one another and to be able to be very authentic. And then I'll say that again. Again, I want you guys to go ahead and invite other people into this conversation. And as you put your questions in the chat, remember that we are working together to establish connectivity and peace and a better way to do this. And this is also a show for youth. So youth will be listening in and maybe even seeing some of the comments that are shared. So consider that. So a little bit about Karen. So Karen, I want to introduce you. Karen is a mentor, activist, entrepreneur, attorney, author, educator, proud San Franciscan, and a single soccer mom. In 2014, she founded Racy Conversations, a workplace workshop facilitation company to inspire the anti-racist generation. Y'all heard me, anti-racist, not just I'm not racist. Hundreds of workplaces nationwide have benefited from Racy Conversations workshops. She is currently seeking a publisher for her first book, White Women, We Need to Talk, Doing Our Part to End Racism. As a white woman, Karen experienced sexual harassment, wage gap, and glass ceiling from white men in the workplace, but she noticed the most harmful workplace behavior came from white women who viewed her as a threat to their proximity to white men in power. She worked for diverse organizations leading diverse teams, largely reporting to women of color who were excellent mentors and role models. Emulating them, she learned how to relate across difference as equals and build relationships based in trust. Mentoring young adults of color, launching corporate careers in tech, Karen came to understand that racism is the underlying problem in our society. Everything she had learned growing up about race and racism was harmful and inaccurate. She was a part of the problem and she needed to change. Inspired by Mike Brown, Black Lives Matter, and her mentees in 2014, Karen vowed to stop preparing young adults of color for the workplace and start preparing the workplace for young adults of color by sharing what she had learned. This was the genesis of Racy Conversations. Karen's passion projects are police accountability activism, building interracial sisterhood, and raising anti-racist children. She serves on the work group overseeing implementation of the U.S. Department of Justice recommendations for ending bias at SFPD. She hosts interracial sisterhood events throughout the United States. Her 2018 video, Dear White Women, No More Permit Patties, received 7 million views. Alongside her Women's March sisters, she was arrested 5 times, disrupting the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh. In June 2020, she was featured on Nightline speaking to other white moms about how she talks with her kids about race. She is a graduate of Mount Holyoke College. That's where she got her bachelor's, the University of Texas, and that's where she received her master's, and New York Law School, and is admitted to practice in New York. Well, Karen, say something to the people.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Bathsheba. Thank you so much, Bathsheba. You know, I just love you and I love young people, and I'm so honored to have this conversation today with young people, with you. And thank you so much for providing this opportunity. I truly appreciate it.
Well, thank you for saying yes. And not just saying yes, but for the incredible work that you do. And I'm excited to have you here today and that we can actually have an authentic conversation that is both peaceful and helps us all look through the lens of humanity, understanding there is room for error and room for us both to expose any ignorance we may have when it comes to seeing each other through the lens of race. So with that being said, let's have a cage-free conversation.
That sounds great. I'm ready to break out of my cage. Definitely.
Let's go. So, Karen, the work you do is very much needed in the world today, and specifically here in the United States with the racial tensions that currently exist. While many are working to tackle some of the issues that have persisted for hundreds of years, you and your organization stand out as a beautiful anomaly and breath of fresh air. How did you end up on this journey to bridge the chasm that exists in our country? Help us see through your eyes as a child.
Yeah, thank you. That is such an excellent question. I grew up in an almost entirely white community. My parents were very progressive, liberal people. They taught me that racism is terrible. Dr. Martin Luther King is wonderful. And the way to not be racist is to be colorblind and to treat everybody the same. But because we lived in an almost entirely white community, I never actually saw them do that. They just were telling me that. Meanwhile, at school, they were showing us films designed to deter us from taking drugs that were largely films of Black people overdosing on heroin. And then on TV at home, I'm also seeing all these really sensationalized, disturbing images of Black people. So as I grow older and I start to notice, well, why is there so much racial inequality in our society? The story I get back, both at home and at school, is, well, we used to have terrible racism, but then there was the civil rights movement led by Dr. King, who is wonderful. And now opportunities are distributed equally. And some families choose to work really hard, and that's why we have what we have, and other families choose not to, and that's why they're in the situation that they're in. And had I not been the mentor to all those young adults, I think that would still be my underlying understanding of racial inequality. I think that is what a lot of my white friends are teaching their children today, which is why I spend a lot of time educating white parents about how to talk with our kids about race.
So you're saying that a lot of white parents believe that the reason that people don't access certain opportunities is just because they don't work hard.
Exactly, and that the people who do access those opportunities did it through their own hard work. Meanwhile, the whole reason why I have a college degree and own my own home is because my mother had a college degree and owned her own home. And the reason why she was able to do that was because her grandfather got a land grant through the Homestead Act, got off the boat from France, made his way to Western Nebraska, and in the 1880s, acquired 360 acres of land from the U.S. government, for which he paid $60 through the homestead.
What?
Yeah. And that land is still, that's where my mom grew up. That land is still in my family's possession and is the origin of our middle class status. Now, I grew up learning all about my great grandfather and what a hard worker he was. Creating a farm is a lot of work, right? So I just heard about all the hard work. I never realized, okay, the whole reason why he was able to save the money from his hard work was because the U.S. government came through and genocided and removed the Native Americans. That land is the traditional territory of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Kiowa, and then took over their land and granted it to my great-grandfather because he was white, because he was Protestant, because he was a man. At the same time, when many Black people who had recently been emancipated were stuck sharecropping on the same plantations where they had previously been enslaved, and if they tried to move, they were subjected to white mob terrorism violence. So, they would have loved to have benefited from the Homestead Act, but they weren't able to. And but this whole narrative gets whitewashed over that it was all because of my great grandfather's hard work.
When did you start like acquiring this knowledge of like African American history? I know you said that you grew up around all white people. So I guess my question is twofold. What was your first interaction with someone of color? What was that like? And then two, when did you start acquiring all of this knowledge about, African American history?
Well, I did have a Black friend when I was growing up, who I met through my church, and I went over to her house and spent the night, and yeah. But I didn't really start to have a lot of relationships across difference until I went to Mount Holyoke, right? And it's also interesting, Bathsheba, because for the longest, I never really thought about, well, why was the town that I grew up in so white? But it turns out it was a sundown town, meaning an intentionally created all-white community where Black people were not allowed to rent, own, could not stay in a hotel. They had to be out of town by sundown. So even though, the Fair Housing Act made sundown towns illegal, but that was like in 1968. It's not like overnight they just become, integrated.
They stop being sundown towns.
Exactly. Like, it was going to be the first family to be like, oh, that seems like a nice place to live.
Yeah.
So at any rate, yeah. So at Mount Holyoke, I start to meet women from all over the country and all over the world, and a lot of women who had very different upbringings from mine, and start to just really listen to their stories. And I'm learning all this incredible, we're reading Audre Lorde, we're reading This Bridge Called My Back, etc. But I think at that age, I was so young that I couldn't fully understand what they were talking about, So I graduated from Mount Holyoke and I moved to Austin to start my, to go to University of Texas. And I see a flyer, we need volunteers for this shelter for Central American refugees. And I start giving overnight supervision. I'm like 22, 23, and I'm providing overnight supervision in this shelter. And it's all these undocumented immigrants from all over Latin America. And this is kind of their first stop. So I'm just sitting there like watching telenovelas with them and listening to their stories, and yeah. So anyway, it's been a long journey. How I really learned about African American history was since I moved to San Francisco in 2012. San Francisco, the Bay Area is just such a wealth of activists, historians, people, and there's always things to do. There's always lectures, there's all kinds of opportunities, people on the radio, and then also a lot of protest and activism. So I'm so blessed because I've been really embraced here in my community, and I feel like had I not moved to San Francisco, I don't think I would have learned about all these things,
How did that spur you on toward advocacy for, this anti-racist generation?
Yeah, well, that was so. As you mentioned in my introduction, it was really through young people and mentoring young people. So I was working in between Austin and San Francisco. I lived in New York City. I actually moved to New York City to work on an initiative to help immigrants become citizens of the United States. And we helped 50,000 New Yorkers apply for their citizenship, something I'm very proud of. But we were defunded in the post 9/11 economic downturn. And right around then, reports came out that said 50% of Black men in New York City don't have a job, And we have almost 200,000 young adult New Yorkers who are almost entirely Black and Latinx, who are not in school, not working. And coming from the immigrants' rights movement, it was like, what? Like, how is that even possible? Like, immigrants face a lot of adversity, but everybody's working. So why aren't the people who were born and raised here working? That just, you know, and the fact that no one seemed to care. This was not like front page of the New York Times, like drop everything, let's do something about it. But I really cared, you know, and I was like, you know, I really think what people need is job training and internships and connections to employers. So I dedicated myself to that work for 10 years. I was the founding member when Year Up, which is an organization that prepares young adults who don't have a college degree for career.
Did you say Gear Up?
Year Up with a Y.
Year Up. Okay.
And through Year Up, I became a mentor to hundreds of young Black and Brown New Yorkers. And that was when I really had to face my racism, right? Like, why did I have so many harmful and inaccurate assumptions and stereotypes about them? And who was I even to really mentor them? You know, what, like, could my advice really? So I came to really just in conversations like this one to start to see the world from their eyes. And I literally, they would tell me what they had experienced, and I could not believe it. Like, it was so different from my lived experience that I was like, what? You know, tell me that again. Like, that just does not, you know. So then I start to realize I am part of this too. You know, I participate in kind of an all-white social circle, even though I live in this very diverse city. And that's what is connecting me to all these different opportunities that this young man who I may have been seated next to on the subway, but I never would have talked with, you know. That's what is preventing him from accessing those opportunities. You know, so and anyway, moved to San Francisco, started doing student outreach because Europe has a San Francisco site. And in 2014, I was glued to Ferguson because I saw in Mike Brown the many young people who I had come to love. And I always think about what his mom said, that he was going to be starting community college. He was going to be starting college, you know, and now she has to plan his funeral. And I just could not, as a mom myself, I was like, I could not, like, and I thought for sure with all the activism, it would at least lead to a trial. So in November of 2014, when it was announced that Darren Wilson would not even be indicted, that was another like mind blown moment. I'm like, how could they not make him stand trial? At that point, I did not realize that, you know, every year there's over 1,000 people killed by police and only one officer is convicted of a crime. At that time, I thought, oh, you know, even though I'm a lawyer, like, I didn't realize these things, you know. So I go out to brunch in December 2014, so a couple of weeks after this, with these two young Black women who had graduated from Europe, had been working for tech companies for a couple of years. And they're telling me, Karen, we're so grateful for our incomes and our lifestyles. Like, our families are getting gentrified out of Oakland, but we are able to stay because we're working for these companies. But nevertheless, we are being bombarded with toxicity, a lot of it coming from women who look like you every single day. And this is that moment where I'm like, I thought I was helping young people by getting them into these companies. And it turns out I'm putting them into harm's way. I was, and it wasn't like it was the first time I had heard that, but it just all became really clear to me. And we also talked about Darren Wilson, you know, and they were surprised that I was surprised that he hadn't been indicted. They're like, oh no, no one ever gets indicted. And that was when I was like, you know what? I'm going to stop preparing the workplace. I'm going to stop preparing young adults of color for the workplace and start preparing the workplace for young adults of color. Because unless and until we address racism, everything else that we do is not going to, it's not going to solve the problem. Like the underlying problem is racism, and people like me, we are the problem. Like we spend all this money on nonprofits and let's try and do this and that in communities of color when we are the ones who need to change. We are the ones who are causing the problem.
And I heard you. That's really good, Karen. I heard you say that you were wondering, where did you get like these racist ideologies? Where did it all come from? And then even the fact of the disconnect for you, when these situations occurred, you were like, okay, I know about it, but I don't. It's kind of like the difference between reading about something and actually experiencing it. And so, like, I can read about, World War II all day, but if I go into a certain area where certain events have taken place, it's going to hit me differently. And so I understand where you're coming from with saying, I didn't, I understood it, but not really. And it's like, even when I teach my students, there are different levels of knowledge. Like there's the level of, comprehension, and then application analysis. And so if you don't have the opportunity to analyze a situation or to even synthesize or evaluate a situation, you're stuck at levels 1 and 2 of a certain concept. And so it sounds like a lot of people who are not people of color, a lot of white people may be stuck at levels 1 and 2 of understanding what is actually going on with African Americans in this country and, Latin Americans in this country. So which leads me to my next question. None of us are born hating one another. We do, however, learn certain behaviors such as prejudice, discrimination, and racism through our observations and what we are taught from those who God has given us has given authority over us, our parents. We know how impressionable youth are. At any point in time, were you taught discrimination directly or indirectly as a youth from friends, educators, or loved ones? If so, how did it affect your interactions with Black people, and what did you do to overcome it?
Yeah, I mean, just as I described, I was taught this very harmful narrative of like, racism is terrible. Don't be racist. The way to not be racist is to be colorblind. But then never actually seeing that role modeled, right? And then this very harmful and inaccurate explanation of racial inequality that puts the whole onus of racial inequality on people of color, and does not in any way recognize the unfair advantages that my family had because of our race that led us to have the class status that we enjoyed. And I used to say, and it's the same. Okay, here I live in the Bay Area, right? A majority people of color region in a majority people of color state. But 9 times out of 10, if a white friend invites me to something, almost everybody there is white, with like maybe a few Asian Americans. When a Black friend invites me to something, I'm one of maybe 2 white people who are there. And going back to what you were saying before, I used to call it, naturally occurring all white social circles, because I'm like, oh, well, it's just sort of natural. We all know each other. Like we all, I don't know, went to college together, or we work together, or we go to yoga together. I don't know. That's how we all met each other. But now I realize all of this social segregation is very intentionally created. It was very intentionally created by the folks generations ago in my town who are like, let's make this an all white town.
I want to add to that intentionality too, because I know I mean, I have locks in my hair, like I have locks in my hair. I'm very brown. And when I first went to go into a particular industry, I had just started growing my locks. And one of the things that was communicated to me by a white woman, she said, you might have to wear a wig, you might have to do something about that because people are not going to receive you well, due in part to, like the fact that you are, you have locks in your hair. She didn't say locks, but she was just like, you're gonna have to do something about your hair. And so there is an intentionality about, even just, because of how we look, whether or not we're invited into certain circles, or whether or not, young people are perceived as a particular way when they have cornrows in their hair, or and not even just hair, like there's a whole controversy around that. But that intentionality is like, it really stood out to me, and it kind of like hit one of those soul wounds when I think about it, because I know that there are, and I don't try to focus so much on the discrimination and racism that I face, but I'm going to let you continue. Just you can continue.
That story. I mean, thank God here in California, we have something called the Crown Act, to ban discrimination on the basis of hair. But think about every workplace protection that every other group, including white women, has, was earned by Black people through their blood. People gave their lives to fight for the Civil Rights Act that then gave all the other groups protection that we did not fight for alongside Black people. Then we, white women, swoop in and take up all the benefits from that, and then have the audacity to tell you, oh, and they're doing that in our minds. We think we're being helpful to you. Oh, Bathsheba, it's not me, but the way other people might perceive you. So I'm just telling this to you. We're policing you and telling you to shrink. And it's the same, as those white women picking up their phone and calling 911 for Black people barbecuing. It's like, who are we to police? Why do we? And it's something. It goes back to it. I believe we are all suffering from intergenerational trauma rooted in slavery. That you come into every space with the harm that happened to your ancestors, that my ancestors caused your ancestors, you can feel it in your body. And so you come into the space with your sensors up. Am I safe here? Right? I come into spaces with my sensors up too. Only for me, they're much more subconscious, right? Because I am concerned on a deep subconscious level that I am going to be held to account for all the harm my ancestors caused your ancestors. And I do not want to face that. So I'm going to do everything I can in every space that I'm in to assert my dominance, to ensure that you will not hold me to account for that.
So, wow. Whew. Just got chills off that. To assert that dominance. And one of the things that I kind of discuss with other people is kind of, when you get used to certain privileges, right? There is an uncomfortability about whether or not, you can kind of relinquish or even share some of those privileges with others, because it's like, with a little kid with a toy, can you share your toy? Like, there's this scarcity mentality. And I think that may even be present with I would not say all white people, but those who have grown accustomed and enjoy white privilege. We all have learned, different racist ideologies. And I can't say that Black people haven't, some Black people have not learned certain things about white people, right? I grew up learning that, and it came from before Malcolm X changed his methodologies in a way that he saw white people. A lot of Black people picked that up and they started to teach it to their children that, white people are blue-eyed devils, like blue-eyed devils. And so that was one of the things that I grew up learning. But it wasn't until the way that I kind of combated that was because I was a part of a school that was diverse, right? I was bused to a different area other than the area in which I grew up, where there was diversity. And so it challenged some of those belief systems. So when it was told to me, it was kind of like uprooting it at the same time while it was happening. And it sounds like you went through a very similar process. You immersed yourself into different cultures so that you would kind of deal with some of those concepts or constructs that were being created from you watching, like you see on TV. Every time you see Feed a Child, like most of those kids are Black, or, you see crime. A lot of those young people are African Americans. And so you getting to know them definitely took, you to a different place and allowed you to understand more about African Americans. What would it take, right? What would it take for other people who are white to do the same thing? Because you can't fully process, like we talked about before, like in the beginning of this, like there's a difference between me reading about it and me actually going out and being a part of a community. What would it take for, and is it even possible for white people and white Americans or Caucasian Americans to go into some of these environments to kind of challenge some of those beliefs?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is exactly my work, right? Is to inspire other white Americans to do that. And I have to say, if I were a Black parent, I would be teaching my kids to hate white people too. Like, look at this a coup attempt on our Capitol. This is terrifying. I've always been like, well, it's sort of silly to be ashamed to be white because, I'm not responsible for how I was born or whatnot. But to see that like, I am so just horrified by the depth of the hatred and the violence. And it's not as if that was the first act of white mob violence. We are a country, in which white mobs have inflicted violence for hundreds of years in the name of upholding white supremacy. And we have to confront that history. We have to sit with that pain. And I was really inspired this summer to see all the young Black people with the megaphones out in the street, and to see Americans of all ages and races uniting behind them, and to see, there was a Black Lives Matter protest in that same town I grew up in Colorado, that was a sundown town. They were in all 50 states. They were on reservations, Native Americans. Like, it was so awesome to see that. But then to see that 70 million Americans voted for Trump, 55% of white women, more than in 2016, and significant more numbers of white millennials voted for Trump in 2020 than had in 2016. And I'm like, we have so much work to do, and even the way, like, white women are disrespecting Madame Vice President Kamala Harris. Like, they're so jealous that a Black woman, Asian American woman, has become vice president, and they're undermining her already. What
causes that? Because we see that at early ages. What what causes that jealousy to rise up? Because all of us experience jealousy at different points in time. None of us can say that we've never been jealous of someone, but there's like, it's kind of like, it's not just a one momentary situation. It is just constant when it comes to people of color. What causes that? Is there like a belief that, you know, how could they ever be positioned? Or what is it? You know, I would love to.
You think about the underlying belief system of white supremacy is the belief that white people are inherently superior. So to see Black excellence, to see Black people hold a position of power or authority or decision making over white people, like look at the way the Congress people treated President Obama. Like they were so mad that a Black man was so superior, and they could not handle it, you know, and that interfered with their self-image of we are the good ones, we are the ones who should be in charge, we are the good mothers, we are the, you know, and which is a narrative. So you think about, how did this small group of white landowning men amass tremendous wealth and power and keep it for 400 years? Because they taught us all this gendered racist belief system where, you know, white men are the natural leaders and should be in charge, and white women are these delicate things that need to be protected by white men, and everybody else is subhuman and inferior. And those narratives are still a huge aspect of our popular culture, right? Like you think about not only like the historical films like Birth of a Nation, Gone with the Wind, etc., but how those same narratives creep into cop shows on TV. Like we are just bombarded with those messages day after day after day after day. And it's what is driving our behavior. And we all have to break out and understand what those messages are and stop internalizing them. And especially white people. So with what, and then as you were saying, white people have the toys, and we don't want the other people to share our toys. So yeah, there's a lot of work to do. There is a lot of work to do. And I have to say, I've been off my game since that Capitol attack. It just really like, it's been hard. I've been struggling from a mental health perspective. My kids have been struggling. But yes, where my hope lies is in raising kids, and my kids are hilarious. I mean, they make fun of me all the time because they are like way far advanced than me, right? And they call me a Karen and
so this narrative, the two of us, we're mature enough to have a conversation about this, and mature enough to understand that not all white people are the same, not all Black people are the same. And so I just want to put that out there for those who are listening. We understand that, so we're not generalizing all people, but we do acknowledge the disparities, the inequities, the inequalities. With this narrative being present, how do we change the narrative? Because youth everywhere have and continue to witness the apparent disparities and social injustices against Blacks. In fact, you just talked about mental health. I have been approached by many of them about their mental health and how much it is taking a toll. What would you say to them in regards to how they can keep their views of others from being marred by a society that, quite frankly, is struggling to evolve?
Yeah. That is an awesome question. And I think the first thing I would say is don't ever allow someone else's image of you to interfere with your image of you.
Okay? That's good.
So put a force field around yourself and only let people who see you the way you see you affect your self-image. Okay, don't let anyone who does not see the true you through that force field. And I know it's really hard to do, but there are so many people who do love you and who do see you. Okay, and spend as much time as you can with those folks who are going to bolster your self-love. And I love the Kendrick Lamar song where he sings, I love myself. I love myself. I love, you know, and just keep telling yourself, you know, how much you love yourself, how much you honor yourself, and that anyone who treats you like a second class person or like they fear you, you just like obliterate that person from your mind. Do not let them creep in there and make you question yourself. And I think often about Mamie Till, you know, Emmett Till's mother, who after she suffered this horrific loss, you know, she's a teacher in Chicago, and she would teach the young people to live their lives out loud. You know, you would think maybe after what had happened to Emmett, she would be like, you know, to try and shrink yourself. And she's like, oh no, just be yourself. And I guess that is what I would offer. The other thing I would offer is mentors and caring adults, and being a mentor and a caring adult in younger people's lives. Especially during this pandemic, like I have felt so isolated. And so I've been like intentionally calling past mentors and reconnecting with them and telling them about what's going on with my life, making sure that I am in contact with my current mentors, making sure I'm checking in on my current mentees, like just constantly, because there are so many adults who can give you a lot of guidance about this. And if you don't have a caring adult, you know, reach out to Bathsheba, reach out to me. Like, we will connect you. We have big networks of people who really, really care about young people. And we're happy to try and, you know, I'm sorry, I don't want to speak for you, but
absolutely. I agree with that.
I am happy to sit there and listen to you. And I'm happy to try and figure out who I know, you know, who could be a good mentor to you, because we are all like, this has been the biggest mental health challenge I've ever experienced this year. The fact that more than 400,000 Americans are dead, you know, I just can't. When I read the stories of the people whose lives have been lost, and I lost someone, you know, and it's been a lot. And I just want to encourage us to not isolate and to feel like we're carrying this all ourselves. We are all struggling through this, but we have each other. And I felt so, like, watching that inauguration specials and the inauguration itself, and it was just so uplifting, and that young woman's incredible poem, you know. So just try to like surround yourself with all the positive music and poetry and artwork, you know. I've been doing this, like I cut out pictures of my sheroes, and I went to Goodwill and I got some frames and stuff, you know. I've been like trying to really just make sure that the way I'm feeding my soul, you know.
You're doing the work.
Yeah.
You're doing the work. So it's getting to my next question, and it has a lot to do about, the mental health of young people in the educational environment. So according to the Advocate, Black boys are more likely than any other group to be placed in special education classes, with 80% of all special education students being Black or Hispanic males. Learning disabilities aside, Black students, and particularly boys, experience disconnection when it comes to the authority figures in their classrooms. Quote, white supremacy or white privilege are certainly apparent in the education industry, and African American parents are struggling to protect their children from discrimination, misdiagnosis, the school to prison pipeline, and labeling. What can educators and parents do on the ground level to begin to tear at this creatively constructed fabric that keeps many out of the ring to even take on the challenge success brings?
This is a heavy question. Honestly, if I were a Black parent, I think I would want to homeschool my kids. I just don't know where I would send them, because I don't see a lot of schools who are really doing a good job of educating Black children, and who really have educators who understand their own racism and bias and are working to eliminate it so that they can be effective educators. So I think it's the onus is upon all parents to change our school system, and this is something that is very important for white parents to do too, to demand a better education, not only for our own kids, but for all kids. There's a great organization called Integrated Schools, and it's for white parents who are intentionally choosing to send our kids to majority people of color schools, because we don't want to become like, I don't know if you've heard this podcast, Nice White Parents, where it's, oh my God, it could be in my kids' school. So my kids go to a very, very diverse public elementary school with a fair number of white kids. And you would think that would somehow make things better, but then there's all these other conflicts that emerge where the white parents want to dominate the PTA and dominate the resources, and it just never ends. So coming back to the question, and I saw a study recently came out that said Black teens are microaggressed 5 times a day. 5 times a day.
Probably more.
Yes. So again, I would just, listen to your parents, listen to your kids, help them to understand where all this stuff is coming from. And then again, it has nothing to do with them, and not internalize these messages, and work on your self-love, your self-determination. I like Baratunde Thurston and Ta-Nehisi Coates. They met in a Saturday school that Black parents organized for their kids, where they learned all about African history and martial arts and music and everything like that. So I think those types of things, like coming together with other parents and creating these kind of self-esteem building opportunities, and self-knowledge opportunities to reduce or to increase your children's understanding of their true greatness is extremely important. Celebrating Kwanzaa, things like that.
So question for you. So if your child was presented with an IEP, right? Like, and you, or labeled as ADHD, and you knew within yourself that your child does not exhibit those behaviors at home that are being exhibited in the school, what would you do? What would be what measures would you take?
I would fight like hell. You know, I would appeal. I would, you know, really force the educators to face, why are you doing this to my, why are you making this assumption about my child? And what is the root of that? Why do you think their behavior needs to be controlled? Because again, this is the white educator feeling like I need to dominate everything and I need to have everything in order so I don't have to confront the pain of my intergenerational trauma from what my ancestors did to their ancestors. So white educators need to sit down and confront that, and need to, we are actively, if we do not work on our white supremacy beliefs and behaviors, we are causing harm. We are not, if we join this profession because we want to help kids, we are actually harming kids, and we need to shift. And there's great organizations too of educators who are working on making that shift. So I encourage all educators to really study, and not just study, but actually change.
To your point, I've had several situations where parents are not privy to, you know, the information that they need to be privy to in order for them to advocate for themselves. And that's one of the things that we assist with at Cage Free Voices, for Cage Free Voices online learning. I had a situation where I actually went into a school on the behalf of two parents, and they had been instructed that their student was lacking focus, just not focused in class, and and said that the student was very distracted, very active. So I went into the classroom and I put my hand in the desk, and all of these papers came out, and the papers were blank. And when I began to read some of the math work, and because I knew the literacy level of that particular student, when I read the work, I sat down with the instructor along with the student and the parents, and I gave the child the assignment, and I said, could you read this for me? And he could not read it. It was well above his reading level. And I said to the teacher, the problem is not focus, is that the content is above where he's able, he can't reach it. He can't understand what's being presented to him, even if it's math, because I believe the content was probably written, he was in a third grade at the time. The content was probably written at like a fifth or sixth grade reading level. So of course, if I am not able to understand what's being presented to me, or you're telling me to just copy everything off the board because it makes it easier for you, then I am going to be lack focus. I am going to be distracted. But the root of the issue is not the focus, is not the fact that I'm distracted or I'm active. The root of the issue is I can't read or access the level of content that you presented to me. And that's happening to a lot of our African-American boys. And because parents are not aware, there was another situation where information was, distorted, and that information being distorted and disseminated to parents. And because that information was distorted, the parents were under the impression that, my child is doing well. If my child is coming home with all A's, and then you're telling me that they can't pay attention in class, and then I might agree with you that of course I need to, put my child on some medication so that they can continue. But then there's like, what I'm not completely understanding, but because I don't know anything about the Lexile system, or even, understanding, what it takes for a student to be able to progress, I'm going to cave in. So what do we do about, I know we're doing work here at Cage Free Voices, but what can people who are within the school system do about providing that kind of information to parents so that they can advocate for themselves? Or even, do you believe that they're afraid to provide that information?
Yeah, again, so there, where I live, there, each school has an African American parents organization. So yeah, I think that is really important to come together, and provide that information to each other. And just like you're saying, if this is happening, really spend some time listening to your child and figure out what is the origin of this, and forcing the teacher to also listen to your child and not make assumptions about what your child needs. And this whole thing, like, boys' behavior is different from girls' behavior. And so many teachers are women who are trying to get boys to conform to girls' standard of behavior. It's just like, it's not right. You also have to think about, as an educator, how am I creating classroom activities, methods of instruction that are going to engage all of the students and not leave some of them, staring off into space, or feeling like I need to move my body and I'm being told to sit still. There's nothing wrong with feeling like you need to move your body. That does not mean that you're not brilliant. It just means that your body is different from people who want to sit there quietly. So can we create classrooms in which all these different types
differentiated instruction?
Yes, and that will allow everybody to enter in at whatever stage they're in and grow together, and draw on each other's strengths and learn from each other.
I have so many questions for you, but I will ask the final question. Oh my gosh, this is so good. And perhaps we can have a part 2. I commend you for taking a stance and being a bridge, because I'm sure you are constantly under fire, which makes you bold and cage free. You're probably under fire from white people and from Black people. So kind of put you in the middle of it, But I really commend you, because this is a bold stance. What steps can youth, all ethnicities, take to exemplify the same characteristics when it comes to speaking out against racism and white supremacy?
Yeah, that is a great question. So first of all, I think that youth understand racism and white supremacy so clearly. And I think it's so important, when you see it, say something. And if you're the person who's being harmed, when you come under attack yourself, our body's natural physiological response is to shut down. It can be very difficult to say something on your own behalf. So make sure that you are paying attention and you're present and aware. And when you see it happening to someone else, you're speaking up, okay? And you're calling it out and you're naming what you are seeing.
Name what you see.
Name what you see, and hold people to account for what they are doing. And when it comes to white children, listen to what I said. Like, this is often what their parents are telling them, that they have what they have because they worked hard. And this kind of they don't watch police brutality videos. They don't learn about all these things. And so, they are operating from a place of ignorance. I'm not trying to excuse their behavior, because they should be learning these things. But if you can be the ones to educate them about that and to provide this counter narrative from what they're learning from their parents, then you can affect their understanding for the rest of their lives. And I'm not trying to put the onus on you to educate them. They should be learning this from their parents. They should be learning this from their teachers, but they're not. So, let's try and engage them and bring them along, and teach them about how different your experience is from theirs. And that can lead to real understanding and empathy. And always, of course, operating from a place of self-empathy and self-care, and don't put yourself in a situation that's that's going to be harmful or take away from you. Like, make sure you're taking care of yourself.
So what I hear you saying is, young people, say what you see and advocate for yourself, advocate for others as well. And those who are educators, you're going to have to be a little bit radical because I know that there, for public school system, there's curricula that is already created for what teachers are supposed to teach in their classrooms. So the charter, the charter schools and private schools, they have a lot more flexibility. But the challenge becomes, this worry or concern about whether or not I'll be able to remain stable, right? Financially, if I take this chance, if I stand out, if I stand up for my students, because I see that there's a need for them to be educated in other ways, and those ways might not necessarily be in agreement with the way things have been created for that school system. So this has been a great conversation, and I can't wait. I hope we can have a part 2 because there's so much more to talk about, so much. So thank you so much for joining us, guys. Everybody who's listening, everybody who will listen, thank you so much for joining us for this episode on tackling race relations and demolishing barriers. If you would like to find out more about Karen Fleshman Esquire, follow her on social media at Karen Fleshman on both Facebook and Instagram. Stay tuned for the next episode. And if you liked what you heard and would like your children to be involved in Cage-Free Voices online learning, feel free to reach out to us at cfvonlinelearning.com. Listen, we talked about a number of different things in this discussion. These discussions are also available on our Cage-Free Voices online learning site, cfvonlinelearning.com. We have, it is a full integrated system for students. We talked about the need for differentiation. So we do have differentiation. It is culturally diverse. It is not just for Black students. It is for all students of all walks, nationalities, ethnicities. And so we raise global leaders in literacy and help students see themselves even if the world is blind, as you hear me talk about every time. That is our tagline. So if you're interested and you want to find out more, again, go to cfvonlinelearning.com. We have one-on-one instruction where your students, and a lot of students who have been labeled as ADHD or given a number of different labels, we see different kids. We see different kids, we see creative kids, and we hone in on that creativity to help them unearth what they already possess, as opposed to us feeling like we're giving them something. All right, guys, remember to see yourself even if the world is blind. Reflect, connect, and transcend every internal and external barrier that will try to cage your voice. Remember, be cage-free and be an anti-racist generation. Peace.